Nigeria, it's a case of religion being stuck between local customs and the mighty Supreme Court. Jonathan's here to break it down for us.
Yahya Sharif Aminu, a musician sentenced to death for alleged blasphemy, was granted permission to file an appeal outside the legally prescribed time frame. The case has drawn national and international attention, highlighting tensions between religious law and constitutional rights in Nigeria. The High Court granted the extension and will hear the case. Sharia law is a brutal, over-the-top death or serious bodily injury for just about any infraction. Nigeria has a secular constitution, but the Kano area and related states are allowed Sharia law. And the defense said that they had only been given the verdict a day before. They required more time to prepare a defense, something not granted in the original trial in Sharia court, where no defense attorney was allowed. The story is from Reuters by Camillus Ebo on September 25th, 2025.
Wow. Well, seems like there is several jurisdictions, maybe local customs at play that are kind of guiding what's happening with this person who is accused of blasphemy. So you said that the Constitution is secular, right? Mm-hmm. But this man is being charged with a religious crime. How is that possible under this Constitution?
Well, that's the big question, actually. And what it is these Muslim states, or majority Muslim states, were granted Sharia law when they, after the dictatorship in 1999 was overthrown. And they were trying to keep everybody united. And so, and form a government. And so when the government was formed, these states shortly thereafter decided that they wanted Sharia law, and the governors of those states basically declared it. And there was, at that point, there were a bunch of riots where actually literally thousands of both Muslims and Christians. There's a large Christian minority in some of those states, and the Christians were upset that they were going to be subject to Sharia law, and which was actually somewhat of a misconception. But the government did not do a good communications job, and so there were many thousands of people killed as a result. And when that was all settled out, they had Sharia law, but technically just for Muslims. So I guess you have to be a member of the faith to do that, which begs the question, of course, well, if you get caught doing something, can you deconvert immediately and not get your arm cut off for stealing something?
The misconception was by the Christians thinking that they would be subject to Sharia law, and they wouldn't be. So then this court was just a Muslim court, right? And that Muslim court found this man guilty because he's Muslim. That's what I'm understanding. And now it's going up to the Supreme Court. Go figure. The guy's religion kind of turned against him, so he turns to the state. He turns to the secular organizations that can maybe protect him. Eli, I wanted to ask you what your take on this story is.
Yeah, so I see it a little bit differently. I don't think that I want to get his name right. Sharif Aminu, that we're talking about. I don't think that he chose to be tried in the Muslim, because the secular constitution of Nigeria doesn't have a code for blasphemy. They don't have a law about that because that's not a secular law. Mm-hmm. So a lot like Jonathan described, like in a year after they adopted their secular constitution, 12 states, including Kano, experienced a Sharia revival, and instead of just using Sharia law in their small personal interpersonal matters like marriage or divorce or inheritance, things that they would consider property, they started incorporating it into criminal punishments as well. So the thing here is that the majority Muslim version or denomination in Kano is Sunni. and Sharif Aminu is not Sunni. So he circulated this like audio on like WhatsApp and some other like, social apps, just basically criticizing or venerating another prophet that is venerated in his. There were some details like that. I don't want to say that's necessarily exactly. He is Muslim. He's just a different version of Muslim than the Sunnis, than the people who tried him.
That's a very interesting detail. So actually, to your point, I wasn't quite stating that he chose to be tried in court, in the Muslim court. However, it's interesting to me that Jonathan says, well, the Christians thought they would be subject to Sharia law and they weren't. And then this guy who's not a Sunni was subject to Sharia law. So maybe the Christians might have been right, in the aspect that this could be the groundwork to move into other religions. Now, I guess he's still Muslim, but I think it also speaks to the idea that secular government is stepping in to kind of save the day. And I think that's an important lesson to take about this, or to think about, because they're the ones that ultimately are administratively consistent with the government, keeping all religious bias out of it. And I think it's necessary. It's unfortunate that this guy was forced into these customs, if you will. I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions because I don't know anything about him, but and a lot of people don't choose their religion, but living this Muslim lifestyle and then it collapsing on you, you turn to the secular institutions to save you. And I just think that that's an interesting factor. But I didn't mean to cut you off if I did. I wanted to ask you what conclusions you can actually draw from the Supreme Court hearing his appeal. And I think I just kind of gave my own, but maybe you had something different.
And I a little along the same lines, but I see here that I think that the Supreme Court of Nigeria is recognizing that the Sharia court violated this person's constitutional rights that are protected under the Constitution of Nigeria. And there's a lot of sections here that it applies to. I looked up a few of them. Section 38 is their freedom of thought, or it says freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, including freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom to manifest and to propagate his religion or belief. So that's something that the Constitution protects him to do, or allows him to do. He's protected by doing that. And what essentially happened is the article talks about the sentencing being handed down very rapidly or something. It wasn't super clear what they were what they were explaining there. But what it sounds like is this Sharia court try to get this done as quickly as possible. And because they weren't able to get the execution done quickly enough, that's like he was able to get the appeal submitted. And if they had had it their way, he wouldn't have even had time to do it, and they would have just gotten away with it.
Yeah, and it's stunning, I think, that this is a religion that preaches that it's a peaceful religion, but it's so quick to want to kill one of its own for something where there was no victim. Jonathan, Eli went into a little bit about the politics of it all. You think that there is some kind of political tactic underway, maybe involving elections. Would you like to explain, to the audience what that might entail?
Well, yeah. The elected government needs the Muslim votes. And so the reason why they allowed Sharia law when there was a resurgence of popular Sharia law applications was so that the then secular president could get some votes, and they did. And so now this is coming up again to their Supreme Court. If the court decides that this man cannot have his life taken by these people, and that Sharia law may not do things like amputate limbs and kill people, behead people, and that for doing religious infractions, then there's going to be a whole lot of people in the north of Nigeria who are going to be extremely pissed off. These guys are, they were pretty adamant back in the day, and they expect them to get very much a lot of unrest for not being allowed to do their own thing religiously. And so that's going to be pretty much the political statement is, how are they going to navigate? How's the court going to navigate all the nuances of this? Of course, we would think that it's an obvious decision, but maybe they might commute it to a much softer deal, but that still might cause public disruption and public violence. So they have to, the nuance of this, they have to navigate this so that they try not to cause any further harm than has already been done and still allow him his constitutionally given rights.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So we as Americans and as Westerners, maybe just as secular people might say, well, this is an obvious, easy, open and shut case for the Supreme Court to hear out, but there actually could be more there. I think the reason that's such a good point is that the dynamic here is incredibly different from what we have grown up with and experienced. So in this portion of Africa, and really in large parts of Africa, these traditional tribal states existed before the borders were drawn. There is a constant clash between the government that is designed off of the United States and Western models being overlain on top of the more traditional Sunni Muslim populations that already existed in that area thousands of years, or 1,000 years. Right. Before,
there was a caliphate over most of these states, an ancient one.
The Muslim movement started across Africa in the 640s and 650s. I'm not sure exactly when it made it over to Nigeria, current day Nigeria, but I will say that there were tribes and populations and different traditions and language groups all throughout that area that when the English came in and the Dutch came in, the Germans came in, they said, all right, we'll just divide these areas up. This is going to run straight through. Our border runs straight through here, but the people were divided. They said, no, wait, hold on. What border are you talking about? And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that history play out here, the tradition versus the modern state. And so it'd be interesting to me to see how this goes, because, the political dynamic there is one where elected officials have to appeal to traditional states, right? Traditional tribal areas, but also uphold a modern constitution, which are constantly, it seems, to be in flux and in opposition to each other. So, go ahead, Jonathan. You wanted to...
Yeah, I was just going to mention that there are 12 different languages in Nigeria, all from different tribal groups. And some of them are Muslim and some of them aren't, and some of them are animist and some of them are Christian, So it's like Christianity and Muslim are basically imported religious doctrines. So it's the tribalness is also not recognized by the religions, but both religions are basically colonialists. Even the Islamic, they had an Islamic caliphate, but they came down and imposed themselves on a bunch of tribes in that area. And so there was one colonial power, the Islamic colonial power, and then later the Germans and the British and the French and the Belgians all kind of carved up Africa, which is a huge piece of real estate. People don't realize it when looking at a Mercator chart because it's near the equator, and so it's kind of small, but it is damn near the largest continent. There are 29 countries? I forget how many.
No, there are over 50 countries in Africa.
Over 50 countries.
Yeah. And so, but even so, the Muslim tradition intertwining with the local customs and local tribes far predate the Christianity that came in, and then the European cultures that came in and reordered their society. So, as far as that goes, Eli, I wanted to ask you, what does that dynamic mean about the way these governments operate? You mentioned something along the lines of needing to operate on expediency. Could you expand on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's I guess mentioned a little bit earlier, but that's sort of how they rely on, well, if we can do the Sharia thing before the secular government catches wind of it, then we did the Sharia thing. But like in this case, I mentioned, like in Nigeria doesn't have a blasphemy law. So like the thing that they are depriving Yahya of his life for is a thing that is not a crime. It's a thing that he's allowed to do. I looked it up to get a little bit more details. So the charges are basically just like he was really happy about one of his imams, and he was just like saying good things about his imam in a way that the Kano state government just believes that he's exonerating or elevating that imam above the Prophet Muhammad. So that's the reason that they're putting him to death, because they feel like he said, not that he said something bad about the Prophet Muhammad, but that he said something that they think is better about this other guy. That's exactly why that need for expediency is there, because as soon as the secular government catches wind of this, they're going to be like, that's absolutely ridiculous. Of course you can't do that. He has the right to believe what he wants. He has the right to say that. He has the right to not have the same religion as you, and you don't have the right to deprive him of his life. And those are all some of the examples I got of the sections of the Nigerian constitution. Those are protected under that constitution. So, yeah, that if they don't get it done in the shadows before they get caught, then they don't get it done.
I did look up to see if the individual states in Nigeria have their own state constitutions. So in the United States, for example, when it comes to legalization of marijuana, right? Some state constitutions, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I know some states have constitutions, and some states, might have some other forms. But there is, in that regard, a constant back and forth between state and national government. And so I think it's interesting that no state has any form of state constitution, but yet they still create their own laws and challenge the national government here. And in that challenge, Jonathan, you talked about riots. You talked about the potential for maybe more rioting. How does that play into the dynamic between the Supreme Court and the local courts wanting to handle business on their own?
Well, you can imagine that the local courts, even if they wanted to obey the national constitution, they could be put at risk as well. Under the very law they're charging him for the Sharia law is going to, could say, well, they're being unfaithful to their religion. And so, the judges could end up being, if they rule in the wrong way, could be subject to the same sort of justice. And we've seen in a lot of other countries, Muslim countries like Pakistan, and that even families take this into their own hands and murder their daughters for dishonoring the family, and things like this. So it's, this religion is not a very nice religion, and they don't treat their people very well. I always hear a lot of pushback on that when I say something like that, but the facts are the facts. You people the Islamists do things that are just brutal and absolutely beyond the pale of anything that even has any respect for human rights. So this is a trend that's also popular in East Africa, right? Somalian borders were drawn directly through the Somali tribes. And there are many Somalis that live in Ethiopia. And you might say, or somebody who doesn't understand the dynamic might say, well, why are these Somalis in Ethiopia? That's Ethiopia is its own country. Well, the Somalis were there so long before. And go ahead, Jonathan. You are having trouble holding back. I want you to go for it. I was just going to say that artificial borders have always been a problem. You can look at other areas. The United States border with Mexico cut right through the Yaqui territory.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And the Kurds in Iran and Iraq, they're actually just about everywhere.
And they're in
Turkey.
They're in Syria and Turkey. Yeah, yeah.
Syria and Turkey, they had their own kingdom at one point, and now they're just relegated to being minorities in somebody else's jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And we can see how bad they can fight because they were our allies until a certain president decided to do something.
So yeah, the brutality is something that we see in across Muslim countries. We see it in Somalia again. The two northern states, Somaliland and Puntland, they fight Mogadishu. They fight each other over territory, but they are at constant odds with Mogadishu, who might also, even though they're an Islamic center or an Islamic system, are very much thriving off of U.S. and Western support. And I do think that there is a rejection of Western occupation built into the mindset of many of these local tribes, even if they were first overtaken by an Islamic movement. It seems that there's just a lot of dynamics at play. And this poor guy, and forgive me, I want to pull his name up so I know that I'm at least trying to say it right, Yahya Sharif Aminu. This guy is just trying to live his life, gets pulled in by the Muslim power structure. And I'm glad that there's a secular organization, a secular power structure to kind of step in and maybe help. But this is where religion intersecting with government is such a problem. The government needs to be able to do its job without these harsh religious tactics, policies being employed against innocent people. We know that as Europeans, us three, because of our history, we can observe our history that way, if you will. And we see it playing out still to this day. So I want to close with giving you guys a few minutes or a few seconds, let's say, to kind of give your parting thoughts. Eli, I'll start with you. What can the viewers take away from this article?
I was thinking something really along the lines of like what you were saying a minute ago. When governments, of course, have to give like freedom of religion. I don't think that we should restrict people's freedom of religion. But what happens is people start to believe that they're like the things in their religion that say to intervene with how other people live, that they are now allowed to do those things. And if you don't allow them to do those things, you're interfering with their free exercise of their religion. And that's where things like this start to happen. And they're like, yeah, of course that's okay. That's my religion.
Yeah. There needs to be some gray area there. I mean, there's got to be some give and take. And I think that religions definitely need to be limited by government if they are making victims out of ordinary citizens, for sure. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, that the difference is their right to swing their arm ends where my nose begins. And I'm an atheist, okay? You cannot impose your religious views on the society or on individuals. That is just wrong, period. You're violating their space. So boundaries, people, boundaries. Don't interfere with other people's religion. Don't run around hating somebody because they're not in your particular in-group. Just stop and think. Would you like it if the major religion was Islam and you were being hauled into a Sharia court as a Christian or an American to face their kind of justice? So think about it. Don't impose your religion or your religious views on other people. It's just not appropriate. And don't assume they're your religion either.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm
Excellent.
off my backswing.
Well put. And we're going to leave it there, folks. So with that, an article that we discussed tonight, which is a great representation of what we are here to do and speak out against the abuses when you mix government and religion. So separation of church and state, very important. Worship how you want, Don't worship how you want, but let's treat each other with respect, like Jonathan just said. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, I shouldn't say gentlemen. Thanks, guys, for a great episode. And I will see you.
I'm only a gentleman by act of Congress. That's the thing.
I will see you guys.
So are you, by the way.
I will see you guys on Wednesday night. Take care, folks.